Marcus, a 14-year-old black boy, strides down the sidewalk, his face a mixture of determination and quiet confidence. Despite his worn-out clothes, ragged sneakers, and weathered backpack, there's a palpable sense of purpose in his steps. His jacket is old, torn at the seams, yet he wears it as if it's his armor. Life has been hard for him. He's survived without family or a stable home, but Marcus refuses to let those circumstances define him. He carries with him a sense of pride that's unshakable. As he walks, his head is down, thinking of the day ahead. But the sudden scream snaps him to attention, and without hesitation, his eyes dart toward the source. A small child, no older than 5, is running straight into the busy street. The child's small feet patter against the pavement, unaware of the car speeding toward him. Panic floods Marcus's chest as the car's engine roars louder, the driver unaware or unprepared to stop in time. Marcus doesn't think. He doesn't hesitate. His body moves before his mind catches up. He sprints toward the child, his legs pumping with all the strength they can muster. In one swift motion, he shoves the child out of harm's way, sending the kid tumbling safely onto the sidewalk. The car swerves, barely missing them both, its tires screeching in protest. Breathless and disoriented, Marcus looks down at the child, who's frozen in shock, wide-eyed and trembling, still processing the danger they just narrowly escaped. Marcus's hands shake as he checks the child for any injuries. His heart is racing, but there's a sense of relief washing over him. He did it. The kid is safe. The child clings to Marcus, still shaken by the close call, his tiny hands gripping Marcus's jacket. Marcus gently guides him to the sidewalk, making sure the child is away from any other danger. "You're okay," Marcus says softly, his voice steady, even though his heart is still pounding in his chest. Just as they start to breathe easier, the sound of sirens fills the air, signaling that help is on the way. Marcus steps back, relieved, knowing that everything is under control now. But as the flashing lights grow closer, the situation is about to take an unexpected turn. The help that's on the way might not be the kind Marcus is prepared for. As the police car skids to a halt, 2 officers step out. At first, they seem like any other officers ready to handle a situation, but as they approach, their eyes fall on Marcus. The moment their gaze locks onto him, their expressions shift: disapproval, judgment, and an underlying hint of condescension. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asks, eyeing Marcus with a look that's less about concern and more about suspicion. Marcus doesn't flinch. He simply stands there, watching as the officers approach him, still holding the child's hand protectively. He knows the routine, the questions that will follow, and the look that will be cast upon him. He braces himself, but he doesn't step back. He won't. "Well, this young man here saved this kid's life," a concerned passerby says, pointing to Marcus. The voice of an onlooker rises with admiration, explaining the situation as they witness Marcus's heroism. The officers exchange skeptical glances. The one who spoke earlier seems unimpressed. "Oh, really? A kid like you just happened to be in the right place at the right time?" He raises an eyebrow, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "How convenient." The other officer stands silent, arms crossed, eyeing Marcus as if he's a problem to be dealt with, not a hero to be recognized. They both seem skeptical, dismissive even, of the situation. The first officer shakes his head, muttering under his breath. "You're just a kid. What are you really doing here? You sure this wasn't some kind of setup?" The officer scoffs, his voice dripping with suspicion. His gaze hardens as he looks down at Marcus, as if he doesn't believe this boy could possibly do something good. Marcus stands tall, trying to ignore the sting of their words. He wasn't expecting gratitude, but this wasn't what he deserved after saving a life. The coldness in their eyes only grows sharper as they continue to question him. Marcus can feel his chest tightening. They weren't seeing him as a hero, they were seeing him as someone to question, someone to doubt. "Sir, he saved me." The child's voice squeaks from behind Marcus, still shaking but now finding his voice in the face of authority. "He pushed me out of the way of the car. He's a hero." The officers exchange uncomfortable glances. Still they hesitate, eyeing Marcus, their disbelief thick in the air. One of them opens his mouth to speak again, but before he can, the situation takes an unexpected turn. The unmistakable sound of a car door slamming echoes, and suddenly, a car pulls up. It's not just any car. It's a luxury sedan, the kind that only a select few can afford to drive. The doors open, and out steps a tall, imposing man. His suit is sharp, his demeanor commanding, and his expression is one of complete authority. The officers, stunned, stop in their tracks as the man approaches. His presence is magnetic, and when he speaks, the whole scene shifts. "Officers," the man says, his voice smooth but powerful, "I believe there's been some misunderstanding here. This young man is not to be questioned." The officers freeze, their expressions faltering as the man stands next to Marcus, his hand gently resting on the boy's shoulder. The identity of this man is enough to make the officers' faces change instantly, from suspicion to recognition. They step back, their posture shifting as they recognize him for who he is. "I'm David Daniels," the man continues, his voice now much more authoritative. "This young man, Marcus, is my son's protector. He is a hero, and I'll make sure he gets the recognition he deserves." The officers stumble, the weight of Marcus's true identity landing heavily on them. The tension in the air dissolves in an instant, and they look at each other, clearly ashamed. They turn to Marcus, their previous harshness replaced with the sudden realization of who they were speaking to, a young hero with the support of one of the most powerful men in the city. Marcus stands tall, his chest swelling with pride, as he finally receives the respect he's owed. The officers remain silent, visibly uncomfortable with how quickly their perception of him has changed. David Daniels places a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "This young man just saved a life," he says, his voice calm but resolute. "And that's something everyone should be proud of." Just as Marcus and the child begin to relax, the familiar sound of sirens fills the air. The loud screeching of tires echoes as 2 police cars pull up, the sirens cutting through the stormy silence. Marcus looks up, his heart sinking as the cars come to a halt. Officer Adams, a burly middle-aged white cop, steps out first. His expression is stern, dismissive, like he's seen it all before. Behind him is Officer Harris, a younger, slimmer cop whose eyes immediately dart to Marcus with a look of skepticism. Marcus instinctively holds the child's hand tighter, ensuring that he stays close and safe, trying to shield him from the officer's judgmental stares. His mind races. He didn't ask for this attention, didn't want the spotlight on him. He just did what felt right. But now, the officers have arrived, and Marcus can already tell this is not going to be easy. Officer Adams eyes Marcus with a cold, judgmental gaze, sizing him up. He crosses his arms over his chest, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like we've got another hero in the making," he mutters, clearly unimpressed. His partner, Officer Harris, stands behind him, a sneer forming on his face as he scoffs. "Don't think you can impress us with your little rescue act, kid. You're probably just looking for attention, huh?" Marcus holds his ground, refusing to be intimidated, but the mocking tone in their voices is unmistakable. He stands tall, keeping the child close to him as a shield of protection. His jaw tightens, but he stays silent, not wanting to escalate the situation. He focuses on the child's shaky breath, trying to calm him down, not wanting to draw attention to himself any more than necessary. Officer Adams steps forward, closing the distance between them. He gets uncomfortably close to Marcus, his voice laced with disdain. "What? No applause for you, huh?" he jeers. "You think you're special just because you helped a kid?" Marcus's fists clench by his sides. The mocking, condescending tone of the officer's words cuts deep, but he doesn't let it show. He wants to ignore it, to stay focused on keeping the child safe and calm, but the officer's cruel remarks make it harder to stay composed. "What's wrong?" Officer Adams continues, leaning in closer. "No thank you for your big moment? You're out here playing the hero, but no one's impressed, kid." Marcus knows he should just stay quiet, let the officers finish their questioning, but the tension in the air is thick, and his patience is beginning to wear thin. He shifts his weight slightly, standing even taller, though he remains silent. He just wants to get through this without causing a scene. Officer Harris, now noticing that Marcus isn't backing down, sneers at him. "What? You think you're a superhero or something?" he sneers. "You don't even belong here, boy," he adds, his voice dripping with condescension. Marcus feels the words land like a slap in the face. He's been judged by people who don't know him his whole life, but hearing it now, in front of this innocent child he just saved, stings more than he can explain. The word boy, the way it drips from Officer Harris's mouth, he's heard it too many times before, but today, it cuts deeper. The anger rises in his chest, but he swallows it down. This isn't the time or place to lose control. He looks at the child, whose eyes are wide with confusion and fear, trying to make sense of what's going on. The little boy is still shaken from the close call with the car, but now he's also starting to feel the unease of the officer's presence. Marcus tries to keep him calm, guiding him gently behind him as if to protect him from the officer's harsh words. "Hey," Marcus says softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're okay. Just breathe. Everything's fine now." His words are meant for the child, but they're also for himself. He needs to stay calm, needs to show the child that nothing is going to break his focus. The officers, meanwhile, aren't backing down. They continue to look at Marcus with disdain, as if he doesn't belong in their world, as if they don't see the same person who just saved a life. Marcus knows the drill. He's been judged his whole life. He's used to being looked down upon, to being the one people talk about when they think no one's listening. But for some reason, today feels different. Today, he stood up. Today, he saved someone. And that should mean something, even if these officers can't see it. "You're not even worth the trouble," Officer Harris sneers again, his words sharp. "Just another kid thinking he's something special." The words sting, but Marcus forces himself to ignore them. The child's grip on his hand tightens, and Marcus squeezes back, offering him a comforting smile. He's doing this for the kid. He's doing this because he knows it's the right thing to do. He's not doing this for validation or recognition. But the tension continues to mount. The more the officers taunt him, the more Marcus feels the weight of their judgments. He knows how this plays out. He's seen it before, how people like him are treated. But he won't let them win. He won't let them make him feel less than he is. "Enough," Marcus says, his voice steady, though his chest tightens with frustration. "I'm not here for this." His eyes meet the officers for a moment, holding their gaze with a quiet intensity. "I saved this kid's life," he says, his voice unwavering, "and I don't need your approval to know what I did was right." The officers fall silent for a beat. There's a flicker of hesitation in their eyes, but neither of them speaks right away. The tension is palpable, thick with judgment and frustration. But just as things begin to spiral further, the sound of another car pulling up interrupts the standoff. It's not just any car. This one is sleek, powerful, and unmistakable. The door opens, and the unmistakable figure of David Daniels, a well-known local businessman, steps out of the car. His presence alone is enough to command the officer's attention. The moment his eyes fall on Marcus, the look of disdain from Officer Adams and Harris fades into confusion. David Daniels walks toward Marcus with purpose, his gaze sharp, his posture firm. Without a word to the officers, he turns to Marcus and places a hand on his shoulder. "This young man," he says with authority, "is a hero." The officers freeze, stunned into silence as they recognize David Daniels. The moment shifts dramatically as their cold, dismissive attitudes are replaced with caution and respect. The tension in the air is palpable as Marcus stands tall, trying to keep his composure despite the insults thrown his way. The officers continue to sneer at him, their disdain for him growing with every word. Marcus's anger simmers beneath the surface, but he fights to keep his focus on the child who's still clinging to his side. He needs to stay calm. He won't let their words break him. But just as things seem like they could escalate, a sharp screech of tires breaks through the heavy atmosphere. The camera shifts, focusing on a sleek black SUV pulling up beside the scene. The vehicle slows, its presence alone shifting the balance of power. The officers glance over at the car, confusion clouding their faces. A tall man in a dark suit steps out of the vehicle, his posture confident and dignified. His face is calm, but there's an intensity in his eyes that demands attention. As soon as he steps onto the pavement, the officers fall silent, their expressions changing from mockery to confusion. The air seems to shift with his arrival. He approaches Marcus with a purposeful stride, and the moment his eyes lock onto the young boy, the tension between the officers and Marcus begins to dissipate. "Marcus, you did well today," the man says. His voice is smooth, authoritative, and undeniably familiar to Marcus. The boy blinks in surprise. He recognizes the voice but can't place it. The calm confidence of the man's words seem to steady him, and he instinctively stands straighter. The man steps forward and places a hand on Marcus's shoulder. There's an unexpected warmth to his touch, one that radiates a sense of pride and genuine care. "I'm Richard Campbell," he continues, his voice soft yet commanding, "and I've been looking for you." Marcus's mind races, the weight of the name hitting him like a lightning bolt. Richard Campbell? The Richard Campbell? The billionaire founder of Campbell Enterprises, the man whose name he's heard on the news, in business reports, in the mouths of the rich and powerful. This man, the man who's just walked up to him as if they were old friends, is his grandfather. Marcus's jaw drops, his breath catching in his chest. He can't believe it. His grandfather, someone he never knew existed, was standing right in front of him. The moment feels surreal, almost like a dream, and Marcus feels a wave of emotions flooding through him. Confusion, disbelief, and a strange sense of excitement. The officers stand frozen, processing the situation. Their earlier attitudes shift from arrogance to shock as the realization sets in. Marcus, the very boy they mocked and judged, is not just any kid off the street. He's the grandson of one of the wealthiest, most influential men in the country. The weight of that truth makes the officers uneasy. Richard Campbell turns to face the officers, his expression now stern and commanding. His presence fills the space, and the air seems to grow heavy with authority. He stands tall, unwavering, as he faces the two officers, his gaze unyielding. "You've just witnessed an extraordinary act of bravery." Richard's voice booms, his tone firm yet calm. "This young man saved a life today. He doesn't need your mockery. In fact, you owe him an apology." The officers blink, their faces betraying confusion and embarrassment as the realization dawns. Their judgmental stares waver as they try to process what they've just heard. Officer Adams is the first to speak, his voice faltering. "We didn't know, sir," he mutters, stumbling over his words as he tries to backtrack. His partner, Officer Harris, shifts awkwardly beside him, unsure of how to respond. Richard Campbell doesn't give them the chance to explain themselves. His voice turns sharp, like the crack of a whip. "You didn't know, and yet you judged him without a second thought. That's the problem," he continues, his words deliberate and powerful. "You think you can assume the worst about someone just because of their background, their skin color, or their circumstances. You're wrong." The officers remain silent, unsure how to respond. They stand there, caught off guard by Richard's pointed words. For a moment, the world feels still. the weight of their mistake pressing down on them. The realization of how wrong they were seems to wash over them in waves, and they are left speechless, their pride deflated. Richard Campbell doesn't wait for an apology. He doesn't need one. His gaze remains steady on the officers, his words final. "I don't expect an apology from you," he says, his voice quieter now, but with an edge that leaves no room for argument. "But maybe you'll think twice the next time you judge someone based on where they come from or what they look like." He turns back to Marcus, his face softening as he addresses his grandson. "Marcus," he says, his voice filled with warmth and pride, "you've shown me today what kind of person you are, and I couldn't be prouder." Marcus, still in shock, doesn't know how to respond. He looks at Richard, his grandfather, the man who, in one sentence, changed everything. The man who, despite his wealth and status, sees him not as a problem, but as a hero. His heart swells with emotion as he takes in the kindness and acceptance in Richard's eyes. The officers stand there, their silence heavy with regret. They avoid meeting Richard's gaze, acutely aware of their earlier mistake. The weight of the situation is clear, but it doesn't matter. Richard Campbell has spoken, and they've been put in their place. Marcus is no longer just the troubled kid. He's the grandson of a billionaire, someone who commands respect, and someone who deserves it. Richard places a hand on Marcus's shoulder again, his smile warm and genuine. "You've got a lot to offer, Marcus, and I'm here for you. Always." Marcus doesn't know what to say. His emotions are a whirlwind, but for the first time in his life, he feels seen. He feels heard. He feels like he matters. The officers, now deflated and embarrassed, turn and walk away, their heads low. They know they've made a grave error in judgment, and there's nothing left to do but leave. As Marcus stands there side by side with his grandfather, a new chapter begins. One where he's not just surviving on the streets, he's part of something bigger. He's part of a family that values him for who he is, not for what others expect him to be. The camera pulls back as Richard and Marcus walk together, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The future feels wide open, and Marcus can't help but feel that, with his grandfather by his side, anything is possible. As the officers stand silently, Marcus turns his gaze toward his grandfather, Richard Campbell. The weight of the day's events crashes down on him, the taunts from the officers, the sudden recognition, the powerful truth that his life is about to change in ways he never imagined. He's been fighting for survival on his own for so long, he doesn't know how to respond to what's unfolding before him. Richard turns to Marcus with a gentle smile, his voice steady but full of pride. "Marcus, I'm proud of you. You've shown incredible courage today. I've been searching for you for a long time, and I think you deserve to know the truth about who you are." Marcus feels a lump form in his throat as Richard's words sink in. He's been alone for so long, barely scraping by in a world that didn't care about him. But here, standing in front of him, is someone who sees him, who believes in him. He's not just a lost kid on the streets anymore. He's someone's grandson, and not just anyone's, a billionaire's. The reality of it feels almost impossible. Marcus looks up at Richard, the emotions swirling inside him, making it hard to find words. Richard continues, his voice soft but resolute. "I've been following your story. I'm here because I want you to be a part of my family, Marcus. You deserve the opportunity to live the life you've always wanted, to be more than just a kid from the streets." The words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Marcus's mind races as he processes what Richard is saying. This is the chance he's never had. The chance to be something more than just a survivor, to have a future filled with possibilities he couldn't even dream of. Richard pauses, glancing over at the two officers who stand frozen, their faces blank and embarrassed. "I trust you'll treat Marcus with the respect he deserves from now on," he says with quiet authority. His words are simple, but they carry the weight of a man used to being listened to. The officers exchange uneasy glances, their silence thick with regret. They've been called out, confronted with their own ignorance and prejudice, and they know there's no way to undo the hurt they've caused. They stand there, chastised, unsure of how to respond. Their earlier bravado has completely evaporated, and they can only look down, embarrassed by their own behavior. Marcus watches them, his heart still racing from the ordeal. The emotional tension of the moment settles in. He has been dehumanized, judged, and belittled. But here, standing beside him, is a man who sees him for who he truly is, a brave young person capable of great things. Richard places a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder, guiding him away from the officers. The gesture is simple, but full of meaning. Marcus feels the weight of the world lift off his shoulders as Richard's presence envelops him, offering comfort, safety, and a promise of something more. As they walk away, the camera lingers on the officers, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment, shame, and regret. They stand there, stunned by the revelation, realizing the magnitude of their mistake. They had judged Marcus without a second thought, assuming they knew who he was based on his appearance, his background, and his circumstances. But the truth was far different, and their mistake was now glaringly obvious. The camera shifts back to Marcus and Richard, who are now walking toward the black SUV. The world seems to shift around Marcus as he takes slow, deliberate steps, his mind racing with everything that has just happened. For the first time in his life, he feels a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. He's not just a product of his environment anymore. He's someone with a future, someone who has a family willing to support him and help him thrive. As they get into the SUV, the camera pans out, capturing the moment as the vehicle drives away, leaving the officers standing in the street. The car's engine hums as the scene fades, and the viewers are left with a sense of satisfaction. Marcus, the boy who was judged and mocked, is walking toward a future full of promise, leaving behind a world that failed to see him for who he truly was. Inside the SUV, Marcus sits beside Richard, the man who has just changed his life. The air is quiet between them, but there's an unspoken understanding. For Marcus, this moment is the beginning of something new, a life where he's no longer invisible, where his worth isn't determined by the color of his skin or his circumstances, but by the person he truly is. Richard looks over at Marcus, his smile warm and sincere. "We've got a lot to talk about, Marcus, but I want you to know this. You don't have to face the world alone anymore." Marcus feels a lump in his throat. The boy who once felt like a shadow in the streets now feels seen. For the first time, he feels like he truly belongs. The scene fades out, leaving the viewers with a feeling of hope, a reminder that everyone deserves to be seen, respected, and given the chance to thrive, no matter where they come from or how they've been treated. The scene transitions smoothly to a brighter, more hopeful future for Marcus. The camera pans through the lavish interior of Richard Campbell's mansion, its grand dining room filled with soft light, the walls adorned with expensive art, and a long table surrounded by elegantly dressed people. The air is warm, filled with the sound of polite conversation and clinking glasses. Marcus, once a young boy wandering the streets, now sits comfortably at the table, dressed in a fine suit that contrasts sharply with the tattered clothes he once wore. His nervousness is palpable, but there's a quiet sense of wonder in his eyes, as if he can hardly believe the transformation taking place before him. The camera zooms in on Marcus's face as he surveys the room. For the first time in a long while, he feels a sense of belonging. No longer is he the kid pushed to the margins, the one people avoided or looked down upon. Here, in this opulent setting, he's seen for who he truly is, a young man capable of greatness, someone worthy of respect, love, and opportunity. As Marcus eats, The camera lingers on his expression, capturing the quiet pride that's slowly replacing the uncertainty he had carried for so long. The weight of the past, the loneliness, the survival instincts honed by hardship, begins to lift, and for the first time, Marcus allows himself to feel the comfort of family, of being part of something bigger than himself. The final scene shifts to the expansive gardens outside the mansion. The sun is setting, casting a golden hue over the manicured lawns, flowers in full bloom. Richard and Marcus walk side by side, their footsteps quiet against the gravel path. Richard, with his confident gait and warm smile, looks over at Marcus with pride, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "We're just getting started, Marcus," he says, his voice rich with encouragement. "There's so much ahead of you." Marcus nods, his eyes forward, taking in the lush beauty of the garden. His posture is different now, his shoulders no longer hunched in defense but relaxed, open. He's no longer the frightened, invisible boy in the streets. He's someone who's been given a chance to grow, to learn, to live without fear. He feels it in the way Richard looks at him, in the way the world around him feels a little brighter, a little less overwhelming. The camera pulls back, showing the two walking away, side by side, their figures framed against the backdrop of the mansion. The sound of their footsteps fades into the soft breeze of the evening, and the shot lingers on them as they walk off into a future that is filled with possibility and hope. For Marcus, it's a future he could have never imagined just days before. A future where his worth isn't dictated by his past or the assumptions others have made about him. A future where he's no longer just surviving, but thriving, with a family that sees him for who he truly is, capable, worthy, and full of potential.